This is TWiT.
I'm in London.
Yeah.
So I had to drop by the Whisky Exchange, which is a lovely place just up in Covent Garden. I walked up there and I thought, I'm going to go get a whiskey that you probably can only find in the UK. And the Flora Fauna bottles are great for that. And this particular one is Dailuaine. Now, there's a lot more letters in the name than this, which you actually pronounce. Like the I disappears.
It's like Worcester, Massachusetts.
Dailuaine. The Dailuaine 16. Now, this is a whiskey you've never heard of because it has no marketed brand. But it's a very old distillery. It was built in the 1850s. William Mackenzie stood it up in the Speyside, Aberlour. Back then, it was a single set of stills and so forth. Today, it's only up to 3 wash and 3 spirit, although they're big. No peat in their product at all. They're Speyside. They do most of their aging in sherry casks. And those early days in the 1800s, they were built right on the train line, and they're kind of famous for all of their supply came and went by train. They had a major fire in 1915 that totally burned them down. And then a group of famous distillers, Buchanan, Walker, Dewars, all came together to rebuild it because it was actually kind of an important distillery. And in fact, those are the folks that merged into a company eventually known as the Distillers Company. With a bunch of others. And in 1925, the Distillers Company was running it. And that, of course, became United Distillers, which eventually becomes Diageo. We've heard this story before. And the Walker in that joint operation that took them over in 1915 is John Walker, as in Johnny Walker.
Little Johnny Walker.
Little Johnny Walker, right? So... And then that's where most of their whiskey goes. Like, this is a place that makes 5 million liters of whiskey a year, and you don't know who they are. They've never been a marketed product in the 170 years that they've operated, and they've always operated. They've been, even when they burned down, they did their processing elsewhere until they had operations back up and running again. So, Johnny Walker was a man. He's from the 1800s. We talked about this in the Mortlock show too, right? He initially was blending whiskey from distant distilleries, and over time he bought up all the distilleries, and he got control of Dailuaine along with the others in 1915. At that time, he also owned Clyanish, Cardew, Colburn, Talisker, and Mortlock. And this is what he was making Johnny Walker from back in the day. And then when the United Distillers and ultimately Diageo forms up in 1997, they have an even larger package. But even before that happened, when it was United Distillers in 91, they put out, knowing that almost all of their whiskey was going to Johnny Walker, but they had barrelmen who were saying, like, there's some really good barrels here. We should bottle them. And so in 91, United Distillers produced a line of whiskeys, all in the same style bottle. This is a conventional whiskey bottle with the little swole neck, but otherwise a standard shaped bottle and a yellow label. And they made 26 of them in their first edition in 1991, of which this is one of them. This is actually a 91 edition of the Dailuaine 16. Some of these became wildly famous and are impossible to find. The Rosebank's hard to come by. The Mortlock, if you can find one, is $800. These all initially came out at 30 pounds. This one today was 55 pounds. So it's gone up a bit, but not terribly. They didn't call it Flora Fauna. It was actually a whiskey writer named Michael Jackson, no relation, who wrote that he called it Flora Fauna, but it's one of those things where the name just stuck. And so they've done additional releases since then. It was a 91, it was a 97, it was 2001. And it's very apparently hip in the whiskey business, if the whiskey collector business, to try and have one of every one of the Flora Faunas. It wasn't a big deal back in the 90s, but today to find them all is pretty tough. And the price range is, like I said, dramatic. I am not a whiskey collector. I am a whiskey drinker. And this drinks brilliantly. It is a classic sherry Speyside. Little hints of citrus up front, little bit of shock on the tongue, but goes very buttery. Just a classic caramel that warms you up as it goes down. And you'll notice
you.
I got this bottle this afternoon. I had a couple of friends visiting while I was writing it up.
Gone.
It's almost done, And enough that they said, we're going to go to the Whiskey Exchange and bring a different one back for tomorrow because you fed us.
Wow.
This is hard to come by outside of the UK.
Oh.
It does not have an export stamp on it. This says a for the UK stamp. This is not an export stamp. And that's how the Flora and Fauna really originally intended. That being said, if you go to a specialist whiskey place, and I can think of a couple in San Francisco I have frequented over the years, you will occasionally find these Flora bottlings for entirely too much. And you don't know who they're made. You don't know them. They're not a well-known brand, but some of them, and this is one of them, is outstanding.
Wow.
I've talked about unicorn whiskeys. That whiskey you taste once and you'll never taste it again. My very first unicorn, the one that I realized the concept of a unicorn, was a Dailuaine. It was in 1972. It was 30 years old. It was put in the bottle. I found it in a little whiskey shop. I found it in a bar in Edinburgh where they were selling Macallan 12 for £4. And here was one that was listed for like 25. And I'm like, what the hell do you pay for 25 pounds for? And I had a taste of it. And it changed my life. and then when I researched it further, I realized there were only 250 of those bottles ever made. You had tasted something you will never taste again.
Never taste
it was
again.
A unicorn.
That's pretty cool.
And so, besides the Flora and Fauna bottling, there are several other custom bottlings of Dailuaine. They Gordon and MacPhail, those kinds of bottlers. Every so often, they'll score a barrel. But if you really want to taste this whiskey most of the time, you'll taste it in Johnny Walker Blue.
The Dailuaine, which means the green vale, and it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I want to live
beautiful.
there,
and it's
forever.
Proper space side. It's in some ways more honest than most. Right, it really was made for the Scottish market. Most of these, you mostly see these whiskeys drank beside a pint of beer in a nice Scottish pub.
Might be worth a trip to Scotland just for that.
Yeah, well, you usually do those cruise things, but I imagine we could actually get a whiskey tour out of it.
I have Scottish heritage. I should really spend a little time. I've been there years ago when I was a kid. But
you and me both. I'm one of those Campbells.
My grandfather was a Dunlap, Gordon Dunlap, and my middle name is Gordon from him. So I have every right to go there, wear a dress.
Well, I'd recommend we get some rooms at the Craigielachi. We spend some time in the Quaish.
Oh, it'd be so much fun.
We taste a few unusuals, and then we go see where they're made.
Paul, are you in?
I've been wanting to do this trip for years.
Sounds wonderful. Mm-hmm. Richard, you probably could make some money if you put together a package tour for. Brought a dozen of us.
Yep,
done a few. We could.
Oh, you have done it. All right.
Yeah. I've been buying whiskey for unusual people over the years. Some names you may know, but I prefer not to be named. Mostly because I take the time to go get the specials.
Nice.
Go visit the distillery and talk to the distiller and be able to pull a cool bottles out. But the Quaish is one of those very dangerous places. It's wooden floor, wall, ceilings, potbelly stove on the side. One side, big heavy drapes overlooking the Spey River. Big overstuffed chairs. The owners' spaniels are there for some scritches.
Oh, how fun!
And every single whiskey you've ever heard of, and many you haven't heard of, on the walls, ready to go. And I think I got to wrap up. They're in the room now. So
here comes another bottle. Bring in the Dailuaine. Yeah.